Welcome to a first look of Tanium Deploy 1.2 and End-User Self-Service. End-User Self-Service enables users without administrator permissions on their computer the ability to install software. Administrators can define the software available to a system, as well as the actions that a user is allowed to take. We'll be looking at the self-service components on the server, and then looking at the results on the endpoint through the self-service client. One of the new requirements for Deploy 1.2 is End-User Notifications 1.5. This is different than the previous version insofar as it's actually a shared service, and other modules like Patch, for example, will actually be tapping into end-user notifications as well. How we configure this is we actually go up and look at end-user notifications under the actual Tanium services. From here, I want to go ahead and create a service account. I also want to go ahead and select the computer groups by which I want to enable end-user notifications are. Keep in mind the requirements haven't changed. This is Windows 7, 2008, R2, and later. So Windows XP, Vista, and the server equivalents no longer apply. I'm going to go ahead and customize end-user notifications with the message itself. I can change the name, I can change the icon here, and also whether or not I want to enable end-user self-service. I may just want to choose to turn it off on all systems at once, but also I can go ahead and customize the messages that I'm giving the actual end user, as well as do I want to add an icon to the desktop and to the start menu. From here, I would just go ahead and save it. And then to actually get those settings out to my endpoints, I just go ahead and initialize endpoints. So the next component we'll look at is the actual self-service profile. This allows us to distribute software availability to the actual users itself. What I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and walk through the creation of a new profile. And of course, to anyone familiar with Tanium, they certainly understand how to target. So I can create from an existing or multiple computer groups that I already have defined, or I can go ahead and define a target. So I can say anything from maybe a custom tag to anything 64-bit or a combination of the above. And then I'll go ahead and select a couple of applications to make them available. So I'll pick DB Browser, Adobe Reader DC, and Adobe Air. Now notice for DB Browser that I don't have an update command, and the reason for that is because there is no metadata for update in the package, so it's smart enough to know not to offer me the option. Now maybe for Reader DC, I maybe not want a user to install it, but I may want them to be able to update or remove it if they have it. And maybe for Adobe Air, although it doesn't require a restart, I may simply want to earmark one at the end, because maybe sometimes the admin just wants the user to reboot once in a while. So we can actually tag that on to the end. Again, keeping in mind that this is all driven by the user. They can certainly choose to postpone this restart, so it's not forced on them at any specific time. Now once I preview this, it's going to show me again the packages, the targets, and the actions that I'm going to go ahead and take to those endpoints, and then I would go ahead and create the profile. I'm just going to fast forward into an existing profile that I have already completed into my 64-bit. From here, you'll see that I'm essentially saying 64-bit CPU because it is a 64-bit profile, and then a custom sensor that I created that says, are you a desktop operating system? And then from here, I have all of my applications available to me that I can install or make available to the user. And then of course, these are the included items. And then if I preview to continue, I can go ahead and update that profile. And that is what a self-service profile looks like. So when I go ahead and preview this, I can then go ahead and update it, and then what will happen is it'll create a scheduled action to push out to the endpoints. So next we'll go over the components of the self-service client. And first, how did I get there? Well, because I chose within my configuration to add a desktop icon or a start menu icon, I can do it through either one of those two methods. So I just double click on the self-service client and up comes the actual client. Now, going over the UI itself, we can see that the configuration settings that I had made initialized earlier, so the icon, the header, the welcome message, all that is right there, as well as 4 different tabs. So we're going to go over those individually. So first, the dashboard tab. This right here is the 5 most recent applications added to the catalog, along with actions that might be associated with it. So for example, in the case of Putty, I have the ability to remove it. Since it's already installed, I'll just go ahead and kick that off. And notice immediately activity went to removing the actual Putty itself. Now also I have the ability to install 7-zip, and the reason for that is because it sees it as install eligible. And note right here, as we're talking, you notice that the screen is actually updating. Every 10 seconds, this client will actually update to let you know the current status of progress. We can also view that status of progress in the activity tab as well. what I can see here is that it's currently running in install for PuTTY, and then when it finishes, it's going to go ahead and give me a complete, and then move it to the History tab. And it will do that in about 10 seconds. As a matter of fact, I'll show you how this actually will auto-update. So since we're actually on the History tab, we'll note here that we installed PuTTY earlier today, and then we actually installed Laps. This was not user initiated. This is actually done by the administrator yesterday. And then notice right here, we just did a user initiated removal on PuTTY. It shows up in history. So let's go back to the dashboard. A lot of activity can happen in this client, and the good news is that again, it's updated literally in real time about every 10 seconds. So as new applications are added to the user's ability to install, it will show up here. They don't have to close and reopen the client to be able to see it. Here I have certain actions that I'm allowed to take on packages. 7-zip is considered install applicable. I can go ahead and click install, and we can go ahead and get 7-zip installed. I qualify for an update for the framework, or in this case I have an unavailable for Visual Studio Code. That could be for a variety of reasons. I just chose not to install it on Windows 8.1, so it didn't meet the system requirements. It has to be Windows 10 for it to actually work. That's one of my requirements, not necessarily a Microsoft requirement. The other thing it could come from that is that it could be that it is install eligible and it will meet the system requirements. I may have actually just pulled the install button away from the user and said you can install this, which of course then makes it unavailable as well. Going into the catalog tab, what we'll see here is a whole bunch of applications, which is really a union of all the profiles that we had earlier. So if you remember when we saw like the 5 or so profiles that were sitting in my console, all of the ones deployed to this particular machine, it will sort them out and say, well, maybe 4 of them have Chrome in it. It's only going to add that once. Also, another thing to note here for permissions is that permissions are actually considered cumulative, which means if, for example, Chrome is in 2 different profiles, one says install is allowed, the other one says it is not, Chrome will be allowed to be installed. We've seen the History tab. Whether it's user initiated or system initiated, we'll be able to look at the actual history. Maybe I only want to see installations or removals. I can go ahead and just limit it down to that. And then of course we look at activity. That's what's happening now, but also what's happening in the future. So I chose to install Zoom in July last month. One thing that we can do in Deploy 1.2 is actually allow the user to install it early if we choose to do so. We can actually put a little Run Now button next to it, and they can choose to run it between now and any time before July when it's actually set to be installed. And that is all of the components of the self-service client.